Welcome back to week 2 of the Football Guys DFS show. Jeff Bell, Phil Alexander, joined by me, Devin Knotts. We made it. We're back in week 2, and Joe hasn't fired us yet. So hopefully we get. No, we're gonna be here all season, everyone, and we've been here the last 9 years, so nothing's gonna change. Guys, how are we feeling after week 1? Like, anything we sort of learned? Are we feeling anything we're changing? Do we
a little bit
go back to
shell-shocked?
wide receivers? Like the elite wide receivers are elite again? I don't know.
Yeah, that's my first takeaway on this slate in particular is the elite wide receivers relative to the running backs that are available. That's what I'm seeing when I look through the sheet. We saw the production. We saw obviously Tyreek Hill have that massive game. Justin Jefferson had a big game, didn't score, but still scored well enough. And so kind of right there, I mean, we saw the injury to J.K. Dobbins. We saw my Bills lose to Phil's Jets. And so just all kinds of different things going on week 1.
Yeah, for me, I had a week where I didn't lose money, which I'll count as a good thing considering I ran a lot of Joe Burrow stacks out there. But I guess that brings me to a point, and that's that you can't overreact to a 1 week sample. Fantasy football is a small sample game. Football is a small sample game, but 1 week is the smallest possible sample. So let your opponents kind of go to the extremes, changing their priors, but also consider what we learned, So just as an example for this slate, I'm going back to those Bengals stacks. I mean, I still think they're the Bengals. I'm pretty sure most people do too. So I don't know how much of a break we're going to get. But I do think that we learned that Baltimore's defense is not necessarily what it's cracked up to be most years, and they're hurting, especially in the secondary. Marcus Williams tore his pec. Marlon Humphrey, I know he didn't practice yesterday. I didn't get a chance to see if he was back today. I think it's going to be a much different story. So, like I said, don't let it sway you too far in one direction or the other, and make sure that you're adjusting to the new information, and you should be in good shape this week.
I'm here for the overreactions, because that's what football is, and it's fun, and that's why people are going to listen to us. If we just said, hey, just refer back to your early season rankings and don't listen to this show, I don't know that I want to live in a world where that happens. So we're going to get into some overreactions. We're going to question that the Bengals are a good play because their offensive line is absolutely horrendous. And we're going to get into cash games starting it off. So there are some key injuries to note that I just wanted to call out. So Austin Eckler is obviously the big one, dealing with an ankle injury, also with a heavy heart as his friend passed away. So condolences to him and their families. But it also looks like there's some other guys. So like Devontae Adams is dealing with a foot injury. Mark Andrews is still limited. So there's some questionable, and it sounds like Puka Nacua, if I'm saying that right, who otherwise would be popular, didn't practice on Thursday. So we may have some injury news, injury talk. I don't know if that changes anything, but Jeff, I'm going to start with you. Where are we looking at cash game plays this week? How are we thinking about building your roster?
So I have a handful of games that I'm targeting. The Lions and the Seahawks are sitting at 47.5 on the line that I saw. Bills Raiders at 46.5. Ravens Bengals at 46.5, and then Kansas City and Jacksonville is a big one that I want to target. They're at 51.5. So that kind of out of the gate, those are the games that I'm looking at, and I think that there's a lot of good value on those games. I saw Kenneth Walker on FanDuel. He's sitting at 6,700. I like same site, Isaiah Pacheco, 5,700. I like that quite a bit. That's giving you some of these running backs. You mentioned the injuries. Joshua Kelly, I think in another game between the Chargers and Tennessee, if Austin Eckler is out, that's probably going to be a very chalky play because of his value. And then I'm on Justice Hill from the Ravens backfield. That's the horse that I'm going to decide to bet on out of all whatever three they might be. And so that's where I'm sitting with running backs. But there's good value, I think, in those games, and that's kind of where my mind is to start. And I think you can do the same thing with quarterbacks. We saw a bad performance from Geno Smith last week, but he's priced reasonably. And then Trevor Lawrence, I think, has a good price, especially on DraftKings.
Bill, where are we looking?
I agree with the games that Jeff called out. Those are the exact ones that I have written down that I want to target. In terms of cash game roster construction this week, I'm just looking at the lineup that I put in, and it's still super for me early in the week to like commit to a cash game lineup. So I don't want to tell people that this is what I'm playing. But in terms of where I'm allocating the money, I think you guys kind of hit it on the head that the high price wide receivers look better to me than the high price running backs. I would love to play Christian McCaffrey, but like when I look at the 2v2s and the 3v3s, I would much rather play like Steph Diggs and Jamar Chase together, or Steph Diggs and Amon-Ra St. Brown together. And if I'm doing that, then I'm not going all the way up at running back. So I think a lot of my cap is going to go towards receiver. And then I think the rest of the lineup is going to be pretty balanced at all the other positions, running back and quarterback.
Yeah, for me, it's going to depend on the site. So we talk about this a lot, but like FanDuel, Lamar Jackson is 7,600. I think that's a crazy price. Going up against Cincinnati, yeah, they looked decent against Cleveland, but that weather was absolutely horrendous. And Jackson is like Anthony Richardson, just for like comparison purposes, is $100 cheaper. Anytime you can get Lamar Jackson for that price, I like to take mobile quarterbacks on FanDuel just because of the non 300-yard bonus. So those elite passing quarterbacks do get penalized just a little bit, like the Patrick Mahomeses of the world. So I'm doing that on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I think there's a couple different ways you can go. You can certainly pay up for Josh Allen at 7,900. I think he has a big revenge game against the Raiders. They're not going to drop to 0-2. Like, let's just be honest here. But the guy that I'm struggling with, and I don't know that anybody is going to play him in cash, which is sort of why I like him, because it's going to give you some differentiation. And I think he's in a really good spot. 2, he's somewhat cheap, and 3, they lost 40-0 last week. And that's Daniel Jones. $6,000 on DraftKings. This Arizona defense, like, I know that they played Washington well. I'm not a Sam Howell believer at all. I think that offense has a lot of problems this year, and I tend to think that this is a Daniel Jones that got paid a lot of money. We know he's mobile. Do they have some weapons issues? Yeah, but Darren Waller should be back. I don't know if that's been official yet, but I kind of like Daniel Jones at $6,000. I do agree with the wide receiver strategy of paying up for those elite wide receivers. And then we'll get to tight ends because we always forget about tight ends. But man, is Travis Kelce enticing this week. And, if we look at Football Guys projections, he's 7,600 and he's projected to get 18 points. There is not another tight end within 6 points of him based on Football Guys projections.
Yeah.
And if you look
at the leaderboard from last week for all you need to know about the tight end position outside of Travis Kelce.
Yeah, it's horrible. Like, even that second tier of Hawkinson, Andrews, Waller, these guys are not like guys that you can trust every single week. They may have the upside of a Travis Kelce, but TJ Hawkinson could go 4 for 35 every single week. It's just not, and I know Hawkinson's not in this slate, but that's just their first name, mostly because I did use him a little bit last week. But you look at even the wide receiver position. So if we're at 18 points, 7,600, that's what we have Devontae Adams at the same price. And the differential between those two, like the $4,000 or $4,500 receiver, I feel better than a $4,500 tight end. I don't know. I think that Kelce, the Chiefs are not going to start 0-2 again, like the Bills. So I do like Kelce quite a bit if you can afford him. I'm not in love with Diggs or Chase. I know that you guys are. I want to see Diggs do it a little bit, maybe in a GPP setting. I think he's fine, but I don't know that he's makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, like Tyreek or Justin Jefferson. I think there's a tier gap between those two.
I could see that. I would say that he did go over 100 last week with Sauce Gardner draped all over him, and he had 13 targets for 100 yards and a touchdown against that defense. I think that the Bills are absolutely just going to boat race the Raiders, and I just really like the whole passing game there. I would love to get up to Josh Allen in cash. For $300, you wouldn't go back up to Richardson over kind of the volatility of Daniel Jones?
I mean, that's the thing, right? So how much of Richardson's success was facing who they play? Houston?
No, they play Houston this week. They played Jacksonville last week, so they've got a great matchup this week.
Yeah, maybe Daniel Jones is my GPP guy, and you just talked me into Richardson and cash. Probably safer.
For what it's worth, I had Jones on my GPP list, and Richardson was my cash guy. Unless, again, some value opens up with some of those injuries that we talked about at the top. There's even more than I forget exactly who we said, Eckler, but DeAndre Hopkins might miss, Brandon Cooks might miss, Aaron Jones looks like he might miss, Christian Watson again. So I have a feeling that the slate's going to kind of go topsy-turvy by the time we get to the weekend. But right now I can't get all the way up to those elite quarterbacks. So I think Richardson, until he's like 7K, I might not even think twice about it and just keep plugging him in cash.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just throw it around to you guys. Is there a injury situation, and Phil, it sounds like you might be closest to it, that you're monitoring, that you're going to be the most excited about if a player is out? And then Jeff, I'll throw it to you.
It might be Treylon Burks at 4,500 if Hopkins is out.
Okay.
I don't know if AJ Dillon, like that guy
he looked so bad last week. Oh, I know if he gets 15 carries, like he could easily get there, but he's not that much of a discount at 5,900 on DraftKings, and then FanDuel. I think it's Josh Kelly, isn't it? Like, is that the play if Eckler's out?
Yes,
against the
Josh
Titans,
Kelly.
though.
Yeah, the Titans are the concern there, but I do think the Chargers. I don't know what we saw from Ryan Tannehill last week. And I think Tajay Spears is a situation where I'm monitoring that if he's out, then that might push you towards Derrick Henry against that Chargers defense that just got shredded last week. But that's kind of spending up. I was concerned about the usage between Spears and Derrick Henry last week. And so that's kind of a back end injury situation to watch. I know Spears has been dinged up, but I could see the Chargers just icing this game against the Titans and getting a lot of work for Kelly, because I think that they want to instill that physicality in the offense, and he's going to be a big part of that. And so I think that they could feed him if Eckler's out.
Yeah, success will just be the question, because that is arguably the best run defense in football. All right, let's jump into GPPs. A couple guys that we had already mentioned. I think Justin Herbert is probably interesting. We just talked about Tennessee, Daniel Jones. I'm going to look at Trevor Lawrence in this Jaguars offense. I think a bounce back candidate, and nobody is going to play him because I think he had 3 targets and 1 catch for like 7 yards, is Christian Kirk, paired up with Trevor Lawrence. Look, last year we saw Christian Kirk in multiple games. I think it was 4 games where he had 25 yards or less. He also had several games where he's over 100 yards. And at some point they're going to, like, Zay Jones is not going to have 80 yards or whatever he had every single week. I know you love Zay. Anyone who's named Zay, Jeff is naming his future kid Zay, if his wife will let him. So I don't know. I tend to think like that could be a shootout game. It's kind of sneaky in that it's at Jacksonville. Could the Chiefs really start 0-2? Maybe.
I I mean, they could. I definitely think it's in play. I do like the Jacksonville side of that one. I mentioned earlier the DraftKings price on Lawrence. One that is gross that Brock Purdy, I think, especially on the DraftKings side, has a enticing price because I don't think that the Rams defense we saw last week, only 13 points to Seattle, is really the true Rams defense. And I expect that we're going to see I think the 49ers offense is humming and Purdy looks really comfortable. And so that's a gross one. And then the grossest one is Tannehill. I think if you're going to go bottom of the barrel against that Chargers coming back the way that they gave up nearly 500 passing yards to Tua last week, but Tannehill does look kind of shot.
The grossest one is Baker Mayfield again. Let's be honest.
You did it, Phil. We made it 15 minutes and we did it.
It's in play again. It is. Here's where I messed up last week, right? I played Mayfield in a lineup that min cashed, hooray for me, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And what I failed to realize is that Mayfield can't support two receivers. So if you're going to do this Mayfield stack to save money, you're going to have to pick one of them rather than two. And then I think that a lineup like that could actually have decent ROI. They play the Bears. That Bears defense looked like it might be the worst in the league. All
right, that's enough Baker Mayfield talk. Phil's on mute. We're gonna jump into running backs, wide receivers. Let's talk about some plays here. I will unmute Phil so that he can stop talking about Baker Mayfield. And Phil, I'll turn it to you. Running backs, wide receivers. Where are we looking in GPPs?
In GPP. So I think that the discussion there could start with what people are going to be doing at running back in cash games. And I got a feeling that David Montgomery is going to be pretty popular at 5,800 on DraftKings. And I think he's a good play and he's probably going to make my cash game lineup. But the flip side of that in GPPs is Jahmyr Gibbs. And look, I mean, we saw him last week. Like Sigmund would say, like he kind of has like when he's on the field, like he's like the green guy from Street Fighter out there. That's going to result in big plays. And if the snaps ramp up, which Dan Campbell, if we could take him at his word, he says that they are, you give that guy a few more touches, a few more looks in the screen game, and big plays are going to happen, especially against that Seattle defense. That Kyron Williams just turned into like the top waiver running back in the league last week playing against them. I know that Cam Akers didn't, but that's another story entirely.
Okay. I like potentially he who shall not be named. We're not going to mention him, but in that backfield, you have Rachaad White at 5,500 on DraftKings, and he dominated touches last week against, again, that Bears defense. And so I think that that's a worthwhile one. Jahmyr Gibbs, you took it right out of my mouth. I wanted to play him potentially in GPPs. That could be two plays and pay off. Like, he doesn't even need to have that big of a workload. That guy is so explosive that he can pay off that quickly. And then come some of the other ones. I mean, if you're really digging to the bottom, Zach Moss, I think, is supposed to be back, and we saw that so much of the work go to Deion Jackson last week. It's a very cheap one, and that's against Houston, so that's just kind of bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple running backs, and then we'll get to wide receivers and tight ends. And I do want to go back and summarize cash games just because I think we skipped through it just a little bit. I think in GPP is in interesting ways just to be different. I do think that paying up, we talked about paying down at running back and paying up at wide receiver for GPPs or for cash games. I'm sorry. Doing the opposite, I think, could pay off this week. So I'm actually looking at some of these top end guys. I think McCaffrey's too expensive, but a guy like going back to the Derrick Henry, I don't trust the Chargers' run defense. Certainly their pass defense looked horrendous, but I still don't believe in this pass or this run defense. I can't speak apparently, but I think that Derrick Henry's in a spot that he could be overlooked. And then Josh Jacobs is interesting. really interesting at 7,100 because the overall numbers for the Bills weren't great. I know that it was primarily because of a couple chunk plays. Breece Hall with that long run. Dalvin Cook had a 30-plus yard run. But I didn't necessarily think that they were like they weren't maybe it's they're missing Tremaine Edmonds, but I don't know. Something just seemed weird with the Bills where they were being run on with Zach Wilson, who like is a replacement guy at best. So I would think that you'd try and just shut down the run and not let Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook beat them, but they were still able to. So I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Jacobs had a big game, particularly if they try and get him out and throw him some passes and try and work him in that way. Jeff, I don't know if you agree with that or disagree with it, but I do think
that's a great call out. He's somebody that I had on my list because Terrell Bernard, I think you hit it exactly, that Tremaine Edmonds being gone. Terrell Bernard, his replacement, was a rookie last year. He was reading the wrong gap and he was getting caught up in the wash quite a bit. And that's what happened a lot with Breece Hall there. And so Josh Jacobs can definitely exploit that. Another one kind of talking about going up that I think will be not see a high rostership percentage will be Tony Pollard. I think that against that Jets in that one, I think people will avoid that, expecting that to be a defensive matchup, but that could be a situation where with that Jets pass rush, they have to involve him in the pass game. And we saw last week, I mean, he was almost running back one on the week last week.
Yeah. So let's just talk about receivers just here a little bit. Go through it. I'll start. I guess I have to pay down because I am paying up at the running back position. I think that I do like this statement of targeting the Rams. And the Rams on paper should not be as good as what they were last week. They just shouldn't be. And Brandon Ayuk at 5,800 is certainly interesting. We saw that he could be developing as Brock Purdy's number one target. Zay Flowers is interesting against the Bengals. I'm not overly fearful of the Bengals. Maybe that's the overreaction we talked about in the beginning. But if Mark Andrews is limited, Flowers look great, and he's just $5,000. And then I think Puka Nacua, if he's playing, is certainly going to be cash, GPP, the top priced guy, top percent rostered guy across the board at 4,900 and is going to be somewhat interesting. You could, I don't know if I would go Tutu Atwell. I do like Puka a little bit more just because we've seen Tutu Atwell and he's a guy. Just a guy.
I like it when Atwell gets on the field and opportunities. I think he usually does something with them. So I'm on board with Tutu Atwell.
One more. So Josh Reynolds at 3,700. That's cheap. And Seattle's pass defense was good last year, but they were a bunch of late round picks. So like Tariq Woolen, Kobe Bryant was a 4th round rookie. Tariq Woolen was a 5th round rookie, and Trey Brown is a fourth round second year player. Could there be regression in that Seattle secondary that was so good last year? You know, Tariq Woolen almost won Defensive Player of the Year. I think that they could come back down to earth, and we could see a situation where, like we saw in week 1, where Seattle's pass defense is a bunch of these late round picks that had success, had it go to their brain, and all of a sudden, you know, maybe they're not as good as what they overperformed last year. So Josh Reynolds is the number 2 option in Detroit. Could be somewhat sneaky behind Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, that's a great call out. He was one that I wanted to make sure to mention. I like that quite a bit. On the same site, another Zay Jones mentioned, only at 4,700, playing in that Jacksonville KC game. On FanDuel, if you're bottom of the barrel digging it, Kadarius Toney at 5,300, I feel like he's still got Patrick Mahomes and he's going to be in that shootout game, and they made a point of getting him the ball. And so I think that will be one. Everybody will be off of that one because of how poorly he played, but that's kind of a back end one that opens up a lot based upon his value there. And then Jahan Dotson is one that he's going against the corner. I don't know his name, but the guy that Jacoby Myers just abused last week against Denver, and Dotson had a quiet game last week, but that could be a situation where just kind of a slept-on guy that I think could have a big game in his range of outcomes.
As a Browns fan, we probably shouldn't use the word abused, but we're gonna move on. Phil, running backs, wide receivers, where are we at?
These are tournament plays.
Yep.
Okay, so running backs was really just I think I mentioned Gibbs already as the pivot from David Montgomery, and I think you said it correctly. That's where I'm playing the higher price guys. The McCaffreys and Josh Jacobs came up really high for me. And then at wide receiver, I like the Buccaneers guys, both Godwin and Evans. I think I like Evans a little bit better. I watched a good bit of that Tampa Bay Vikings game, and I'm going to get muted again, aren't I?
No.
It looked like Mayfield had a little bit more of a connection with Evans. So
one more, and you're muted.
Okay. Tyler Boyd, I like for GPPs. I mentioned that I'm going back to Cincinnati stacks this week, and Boyd is only cheaper and less popular than he was last week, which is very. And Gabe Davis. I didn't think he looked that bad last week from what I saw. I think he just had the wrong matchup. Could be a good pivot off of Diggs, who I think will be chalky. And then I think I mentioned Treylon Burks. He's already coming up very high for me with DeAndre Hopkins numbers still factored in at his cost. So once I pull Hopkins out, I'm pretty sure that's going to push him into must play in all formats territory for me.
Got it. And then tight ends. What are we thinking?
So did we talk about cash game tight ends at all?
I think we just kind of skipped cash games. So I do want to go back to just I said Travis Kelce, but I don't know if there's cash game plays that you guys want to mention, because we do have plenty of time here, and I do sort of want to circle back on closing it. Let's close out GPPs, and then let's go back and finish cash.
You got it. So for GPPs, I think I like Adam Troutman, even though there's a chance that he might end up chalky. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. He's one who's percent rostered I'm going to be looking at this
right
week.
Now he's 5%.
All right. If he sticks in the 5 to 7% range, then I think I'm going to have quite a bit of him, because he's still one of the most athletic tight ends in football. He never really popped the way he was supposed to in New Orleans, but there was the injury there to Dulcich, and Troutman was kind of dominating the targets and the routes even when Dulcich was on the field. So I think that's a pretty strong play at 3,000 for tournaments, as long as he doesn't get steamed up by the end of the week.
Yeah, I'm in a similar mindset there. Skipping over just kind of that middle tier of tight ends. We saw the scoring last week. I think you can get similar production from Kylan Granson is a guy that I think at same price at 3,000 as Troutman, and that's a situation where he could be a primary target for Anthony Richardson. Logan Thomas, I think, kind of had a decent game last week and gave you some production just at the bottom end. And so I just think that from what we saw last week, that middle tier tight ends is just avoidable, and you can open up so much more at other positions by going much cheaper. And then Dalton Kincaid is another guy that we saw pretty heavy Bills use 12 tight end usage, and we're going to step into that Raiders game. Wouldn't be surprising at all to see him get in the end zone. And I think that he's going to get 4 targets last week, but I think there was certainly a lot more that was left on the field last week.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because they were on my list too for tournaments, both Kincaid and Knox, because they had pretty much identical usage last week in terms of rap participation. And I feel like for as long as I've been playing fantasy football, the Raiders linebackers have been getting absolutely smoked in coverage by tight ends. Don't see that changing this week with Josh Allen and company probably putting up a big number on them.
Yeah, I think for me, for GPPs, and then I'm just going to throw it out there. We're going to name 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers that we are playing for cash games. So start preparing while I talk about tight ends for a second. So Chiga Okonkwo for Tennessee, I do think is interesting, particularly as DeAndre Hopkins is potentially out. They just missed on a long tight end, or long touchdown in week 1. So if they hit that, I think he's probably $700 more expensive and probably going to be much higher rostered. But because they didn't, people are not going to be jumping over the moon to play him. And then Sam Laporta at 3,900, I think is just intriguing because I don't believe in the Seattle defense. And, Jamal Adams is out. They have, I forget the safety's name, but he's one of the worst safeties in coverage in the NFL. And then they have those late round guys that I did talk about earlier in the show. So we're gonna summarize. It sounds like for GPPs, there's a lot of options, and it's sort of finding the right strategy this week more so than, certainly you want to find the individual players, but whether you choose to pay up at the wide receiver spot or not is a difficult decision. I'm not doing it. I'm going a little bit contrarian and paying up for the Derrick Henrys of the world, as well as trying to fit in Travis Kelce. And then maybe we'll get into stacks in a second, but maybe sprinkling in that Jacksonville Jaguars stack in a GPP. So let's go back to cash because I am not a good host and I skipped over what a lot of people care about. But if you want my final thoughts, go to Cracking FanDuel, which just set a personal record for most views, which is a big moment for me. And I want to celebrate and give myself a pat on the back because we started 9 years ago with 50 views on a blog. That's all I'm going to say. And it's grown probably, I don't know, over 100 times that. So let's jump into cash games. Jeff, what do we got?
So Isaiah Pacheco is big on my radar because that gets you into, I think we saw heavy usage last week, and that gets you in that Kansas City Jacksonville game. Monitoring the injury situation on Austin Eckler, and if that opens up Joshua Kelly for me, that's going to be one. Brian Robinson on DraftKings, we saw him dominate the touches, and he's at 5,200. And so I do like the strategy this week of I think there are a lot of volume running backs, and we've seen volume running backs in the past pay off and open up paths to, one, getting Travis Kelce into your lineup, but two, really moving to the wide receivers. I just have a group of between Ridley, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, and Keenan Allen that I'm trying to just kind of get as many of those guys into a lineup as I can with just different entry points. And I think that's going to be looking at the slate. And Brandon Ayuk, I think, is, you mentioned that one, but I want him in DraftKings. And so I built a lineup earlier. I got Brandon Ayuk and I got 3 of these wide receivers into it, and I like it quite a bit. And so that's kind of where I'm going there.
Phil?
All right. So running backs and wide receivers for cash, correct?
Cash, yeah.
Yeah. So I like Travis Etienne. I like the game environment. I like his week 1 role. He was 80% of the snaps, 83% of the routes, 16% of the team's targets. On a PPR site like DraftKings, and this is a DraftKings specific play, that's the type of usage that you want from your running back. I really don't care that he lost a goal line touchdown. That's more of a FanDuel concern. And it just gets you a good piece of that game, an explosive piece of that game. I think in his role, he's underpriced by a good $500 or $600. And then David Montgomery, I mentioned, was my other guy. And then I was spending up at receiver to any 2 of Diggs and Chase. And I was making that happen by targeting that like 46 to 4,800 wide receiver range where Zay Jones, who Jeff mentioned, Nakua, and I actually didn't get a chance to look at the late injury reports. What is his injury?
Oblique. He missed practice today with an oblique injury.
That's not good, a core injury. I guess we're going to have to keep an eye on that, but obviously he would be in play if that were the case. If not, then Atwell gets even more interesting at 4,700. And you know who might be the safest in that range, given his matchup and the way he was used in week 1, and the fact that Noah Brown is now out for or I don't know if he's out for the year or just on short-term on IR, but I know he's not playing this week. Nico Collins at 4,800 has a pretty interesting profile. You know, the target share, the air yards, the counting stats that he put up, and the matchup against Indy. I think it's interesting. He's not exactly like popping in optimizers or anything, but it's something I got my eye on. If he plays well this week, I think it's kind of wheels up until he gets expensive.
I feel like Puka's ownership is going to be just insanely high. Like I think given all the steam on him and social media and everything else that's going on, it just feels like everybody's going to put that one in.
It is, but in cash, I don't know that we care about it. So
yeah,
like I don't typically factor in ownership in my cash game plays, just because play your best plays. You don't want to be, playing behind. There's a reason the best plays. Calvin Ridley, I think, probably falls into a similar boat as of right now. He's pushing about 20% rostered. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably going to be up there as well. So for me, I'm actually going to be looking in cash as of Thursday at 7:47 p.m. Josh Jacobs, James Conner, and I'm liking Dameon Pierce against this Colts run defense as like a little bit. I know, but you were also on him last week, and he probably burned you. I still believe in this guy. I know he had some bad games last year, but I think this Houston run offense is better than, they faced Baltimore last week. Can we really blame them? Baltimore has a good run defense. I know I don't feel ranted on the linebackers, but they are athletic and they are mobile, and Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, when they have space, they can make a lot of tackles. So the Colts don't have those guys. Is what I'm trying to say. And then at wide receiver, we've talked about the main guys, but Brandon Ayuk is my favorite, and he'll be my best value play of the week. When we get to that in a second. I like Mike Williams. RIP, the other Mike Williams died far too young, for those of you that haven't been following that story.
I think he wasn't he announced dead and then he was okay? And then did it turn around again?
I heard 2 days ago on CNN and ESPN. So I think he did pass away.
Wow, that's sad to hear.
Yeah, 36 years old. And then I do want a piece of this. I'm going to pay up for Calvin Ridley. I think at 7,200, I want a piece of this Chiefs Jaguars game, and he's the guy that I'm going to go to. So that's sort of where I'm going. If I have the money, I probably don't. I would go up to like a Stephon Diggs, but I would rather go with Travis Kelce in cash than I would with one of those elite guys. Okay. On to the best value of the play of the week. I've already sort of pitched mine, which is Brandon Ayuk. Nothing too sexy about it, but he's a guy who I just believe in. I think he's ready to take a big step. I'm not a Deebo Samuel guy. I haven't been for the past couple of years. I think he's a fun player, not necessarily like the guy who you can typically rely on as your wide receiver one. I think Brandon Ayuk has the makeup and has the relationship with Brock Purdy to do that. So 8 catches, 129 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week. Maybe it's point chasing, but the price has not jumped up enough for that success. I would have expected him to be somewhere in the neighborhood. He's 5,800 on DraftKings. I would have expected him to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,500, to be honest, where I would get to a point where I would probably pause. On FanDuel, he is too expensive. I will put that out there. He's 7,500, the same price as Devontae Adams. There is no way you can pay the same price as Devontae Adams for Brandon Ayuk. Let's not be crazy here. So my favorite value play on FanDuel is going to be, you know what? I'm just paying up for Stephon Diggs at 8,000. I think that's a really good price. He's cheaper than Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's cheaper than Jamar Chase. I actually think he has a better chance to score a touchdown than both of those guys, which is FanDuel what you want to target. So I'm going Stephon Diggs on FanDuel for best value play of the week.
We knew we'd get you on Tiggs by the end of the episode.
FanDuel with their bad pricing will always get you.
So I like Kenneth Walker's price this week.
Love it.
We saw him dominate work share there in Seattle last week, and the other guys for Charbonnet and Dallas were just kind of pitching in, and he's playing in that Detroit Seattle game that I think is going to. And I think last year it was like 48-45, and so it seems mispriced to me on how much volume he's going to get in that offense and the upside that exists within that game.
I'll go with David Montgomery. Mentioned it earlier. I think that he projects well. That's it.
He'll score a lot of points, and he's a good price.
Bill was really going with Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin, but didn't want to get muted again. Okay, stacks. Let's talk stacks. So where are we going? Phil, I'll throw it back to you. What's your favorite stack of the week?
My favorite is the Bills. You could go with Allen, Diggs. There's a lot of ways to do it, right? So I think the way that you probably want to do it, is find your core players that you like at running back and at your other receiver spots. And then you're going with a double stack with Allen. I think it's got to be a double stack, and it's got to be, I'm going with one wide receiver and one tight end, because I think that a tight end is definitely going to be involved here. So I think you could go something like Allen, Diggs, Knox. You could go Allen, Diggs, Kincaid. You could go Allen, Davis, Knox. You guys get the idea. You want to pair him with a receiver and a tight end, and I think that's got big upside. And then insofar as single stacks, you heard my Baker Mayfield and either Evans or Godwin. I prefer Evans. I like Burrow with two receivers, Chase and Boyd specifically. And one thing I will say is that I don't usually in tournaments triple stack, but if I do it this week, I think trying to tail the lightning in a bottle that the Rams passing game was last week might not be a bad idea, because everybody's cheap, and you got Nakua, Atwell, and Tyler Higbee with Stafford, and then just stud out the rest of your lineup. And I kind of like it in tournaments.
I love how we say, who's your favorite stack? And Phil gives us 7 stacks.
Oh, it's supposed to be 1? I love stacks. I can't.
Yeah. Jeff, where are we going with the favorite stack?
My favorite stack is Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley going on the backside of that Chiefs offense. And I think the Chiefs are going to come out firing. We saw him zero in on Ridley last week and hit him over and over again. I think Lawrence has taken the step towards being an elite quarterback, but I think he's valued behind some of the other quarterbacks. And so that's my favorite stack out of the entire slate.
Would you put Kelsey in there too?
I like yeah. I mean, if you want to come back the other side and throw Kelsey into that game too, I mean, that gives you on FanDuel, Pacheco can get into there, and that kind of is playing the Chiefs being ahead a little bit there, and kind of playing that backside, having that stack that's chasing them. So I think there are definitely options on the Chiefs side that complement that very well.
Yeah, it seems like the only way that hits is if it's like a 34-31 type game. I don't know if like the Jaguars are I don't know if they're running up the score by themselves. We'll just put it that way. Yeah. It seems like they would rather run the ball, go with a run-heavy offense, throw when they need to, but they may have to be in a shootout this week. Like they were just playing with their food last week. It was really annoying.
They were
for 3 quarters. They were like, "Hey, we're gonna really try and make Tank Bigsby a thing," and the guy just wasn't. And they just kept giving him the ball. They were giving to Ernest Johnson the ball. They were giving one other guy the ball, is Jamal Agnew, I think his name was.
Yeah.
It was an annoying game. It was an annoying game. Like, just come out. You have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Just throw the ball around. You have all these weapons. And trying to go with the balanced approach was somewhat frustrating. So my favorite stack would have been the Jaguars, but I'm going to not do that just because for the show's purposes and trying to pick something different. I'm going to go with Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I don't believe in this Seattle pass defense. I think I've said it like 7 times now. They were lightning in a bottle last year. They don't have that much talent. Amon-Ra St. Brown is emerging, if not already in that second tier of wide receivers behind Hill and Jefferson. And look, I mean, you could run it back. You could add Sam Laporta if you really wanted to. You could add a DK Metcalf in there as well and hope it's one of these back and forth games. But I think that Goff is ready to take the next step up. The offensive line is very good there. He was only sacked once last week against Kansas City. So, that's sort of where I'm going. Any thoughts that we didn't get to that you guys wanted to touch base on before we end this thing? No? Okay, well, I will apologize for the lack of hosting expertise in sort of jumping around between GPPs and cash and sort of a hodgepodge, but I think we covered this slate decently well. We'll improve every week. I'm not a host by trade. I'm a snarky contrarian analyst who's sort of out of his comfort zone. So thanks for bearing with us. Good luck, everybody, this week, and hope somebody wins it big. Thanks, everyone.